Okay, thanks for the heads up. All right.
Is that all-natural energy and health supplement. Now, of course, I got to throw out that disclaimer that this product has not been
About to start the Raiklin report. I'm going to try to import videos.
WVW Broadcast Network is pleased to present the Ivan Raiklin report with retired Lieutenant Colonel of the Green Beret, Ivan Raiklin. Ivan served 25 years in the Department of Defense, Intel, and Special Operations communities as an enlisted officer, civilian contractor on active duty, reserves, and National Guard across 5 states. Most recently, he was an instructor at the Joint Military Intelligence Training Center, teaching the U.S. intelligence intel community and international partners about intelligence analysis, national security, and multinational operations. He is currently a constitutional attorney. And now, here is your host, Ivan Raiklin.
All right, folks. All right, today's a big day. Friday, September 15th, I believe. Mid-month, September. 2 more weeks until the end of the fiscal year for this lawless, illegitimate executive branch. And let's kind of, I guess we can start with some good news. Let's start with some good news. Because we're usually don't have good news. Next week, Tuesday, 3 p.m. Mark your calendars. Tuesday, 3 p.m. Former U.S. Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund, who was interviewed by Tucker and then was fired because he was interviewed by Tucker by Faux News, because Chief Sund would have exposed the Fedsurrection back then, the Fedsurrection coup, and probably Paul Ryan's involvement in it. And so Paul Ryan on the board of Faux News didn't want it to air. But luckily, Tucker on X had a subsequent interview with Chief Sund. And in that interview, without using these words, indirectly, Chief Sund said, was it a Fedsurrection coup conducted by Yogananda Pittman at the direction of her leaders over at the Capitol Police Board, and then those that appointed them above her, and then the subsequent cover-up coup crew? Well, we're going to find that out on Tuesday, aren't we? Tuesday, 3 p.m. Subcommittee on Oversight hearing. Congressman Loudermilk is going to be chairing that committee, Georgia Congressman. You have 3 other members on that subcommittee. So just real quick, recap. The committee that's charged with having oversight over the Capitol Police and the Capitol Police Board on the House is the House Admin Committee. The chair is Brian Stile. Set that aside. One of the 3 subcommittees in that committee is the Oversight Subcommittee, chaired by Congressman Loudermilk. Congressman Loudermilk chairs it. There's also Congressman Morgan Griffin, that is also on that committee. Congressman Greg Murphy. So Congressman Morgan Griffin is from Virginia. Congressman Greg Murphy is from North Carolina. And Congressman Anthony Despacito from New York. Now, let's kind of think this through. Just off the cuff. If I were advising that subcommittee, and I had access to them, and I basically would tell the staffers if I had access to them, it would be the following. I would say, you know what? If I were in your position and I was advising your Congress member, these would be the questions that I would ask former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund. And it would go something like this. Chief Sund. And I'm thinking that let's go by Congress member. So if I'm Congressman Barry Loudermilk, I would ask the following question, would be the first one. Chief, you were the chief of Capitol Police on January 6th. Can you talk us through, in the most excruciating detail that you can, how is it supposed to occur for the Metropolitan Police Department to deploy normally by the book, right, according to policy? And what are the rules of engagement on the Capitol grounds for Metropolitan Police Department? And then subsequently, explain to us how that deployment actually took place in as much detail as you want to take. And as he fleshes out the details of the deployment of the Metropolitan Police Department on that day, how about explain to us how was it that Lila Morris, Metropolitan Police Department officer, happened to murder one of my constituents, Roseanne Boyland? That would be a nice question for Congressman Loudermilk to ask. And then, what is the policy and procedure for an investigation to be done on the murder of Roseanne Boyland on January 6th that day? Department officer. Now I get it, Chief Sund. You are a U.S. Capitol Police officer. You are not a Metropolitan Police Department officer. What would you recommend, or whom do you recommend this committee, in my office, Congressman Barry Loudermilk's office, he would say, who should we subpoena to find out the details on what was done to investigate, to then determine that Lala Mora's beat down, brutal beating? And oh, by the way, let's play a clip before we continue to discuss that, Chief Sund. And then, boom, press play, the clip of Lila Morris, MPD officer, from body cam footage from MPD that has been obtained by the committee, from CCTV footage, potentially, and some private citizens that were in the vicinity of her being murdered. We've obtained that video footage to include those witnesses that were in vicinity of Roseanne Boyland being murdered. Now that we've played all that, Chief Sund, what would you recommend, in your best professional opinion, that this committee should do to determine why there was no investigation? Or if there was, why was it closed and no charges brought on Metropolitan Police Department officer Lila Morris for murdering Roseanne Boyland? Please elaborate, if you will. Okay, that interaction basically concludes the 5 minutes of round one for Congressman Loudermilk. Okay, next, let's go to Congressman Morgan Griffith. Actually, you know what? Let's stick with the Congress member and we'll go in the second round. Basically assume that they're going to multiple rounds. So the next round for Congressman Barry Loudermilk. Sir, what are your thoughts on the hearings that we have had thus far? So as you may or may not recall, this committee has interviewed Thomas Manger, the current Capitol Police Chief. We've also had a 7-hour transcribed interview with Yogananda Pittman. We've also interacted with the United States Capitol Police General Counsel, Tad DeBias, as he likes to be known. His full name, Thomas DeBias. He likes to be known as the Nobody Guy on Twitter. Tell us, Chief Sund, what role does the General Counsel first, and then the Chief of Capitol Police, actually the General Counsel and the head of the Intel and Interagency Coordination Division, as well as her deputy, what role would those three, and then subsequently a Chief of Capitol Police, would have played in the arrests that were made related to January 6th? Now, this may be a more appropriate question for Mr. Anthony Despacito, since he was a New York Police Department officer, so he might understand the nuances of jurisdiction, the different precincts, etc. So maybe Mr. Despacito, Congressman Despacito, should ask, Chief, can you talk me through, as a former NYPD cop, what is the administrative requirement for you to go ahead and, or not you, but the department, to go ahead and identify a fact pattern that warrants a criminal charge, an arrest, and a potentially criminal charge on an individual that was there on the Capitol grounds on January 6th that day? What I mean by, well, an officer observes something, does a detention, conducts an arrest. Can you provide us all the paperwork, or can you point us in the direction on where we could find all the paperwork related to that initial arrest? Because likely that officer has the most unbiased view of what that potential defendant conducted that day based on the criminal report. I don't know what you guys call it in your department, but please inform us of that. And then talk us through the chain of custody of officer observes an event, detains an individual, arrests them, and then books them. And then as they're booked, tell us where they go, what entity takes custody of them, all the paperwork involved in that, and then talk us through what happens within the United States Capitol Police Department. The police officer files the arrest report, and talk us through, where does that go? Does it end up going through the Intel and Interagency Coordination Division in some way, shape, or form? Does it get a look by the General Counsel, Tad Tobias? Are there things that could be added as part of that process or subtracted? And if so, who makes the determination on whether to prosecute or not? Before it gets to the Chief of Capitol Police for signature. And then talk us through, after it gets to your level as the Chief of Police, you used to be, Mr. Chief Son, talk us through the process of which that criminal charge could be elevated and additional charges added to it. Oh, I don't know. Is it possible that the legislative branch leadership could direct the Capitol Police Board, of whom the Chief of Capitol Police has to take marching orders from, in order to choose a group of individuals, consider them as being conspirators, elevate the fact pattern based on impact statements from Capitol Police officers that may or may not have been coerced, influenced, manipulated into writing those impact statements? What I'm getting at here, is it possible for a Capitol Police chief such as a Yogananda Pittman to contact police officers and ask them to write an impact statement saying that a demonstrator was being threatening, even though that demonstrator was not threatening, but in order to match the video footage of CCTV footage, in order to prosecute that demonstrator, you kind of need an impact statement from a U.S. Capitol Police officer. And if that U.S. Capitol Police officer does not want to write an impact statement negative to that J6 demonstrator defendant, is there a possibility that that could be coerced through personnel action? Or, I don't know. For example, if they have a derogatory incident in their HR file, that could be elevated and they could be weaponized against based on that, if that impact statement is not written in the way that the Capitol Police chief wants it to be. And what about the inspector general? What if these Capitol police officers that are being potentially coerced into writing these impact statements and they approach the inspector general to complain? What stops that inspector general from telling the the Capitol police chief that you got somebody complaining that doesn't want to fall in line and politically persecute all these J6 demonstrators? Is that a possibility? I know these are hypotheticals, but is it possible? And if it is, who should we question, Chief Sund? I know that was a long question, but take all the time in the world that you need to answer that question. If you need 2 to 3 hours, please provide it. That would be the question for Mr. Despacito. Now, what about Morgan Griffin? Let's go back to Morgan Griffin, Congressman from Virginia. So, Chief Sund, I'm Congressman Griffin here. And my first question I would like to begin with is, on January 6th, I read your book. By the way, great account, very accurate. It's commensurate with your testimony that you did. I believe it was in February of 2021 before the Senate. And my only question is, as I read through that, I was thinking to myself, you were with Mike Pence on that day. So let's focus in on questions related to Mike Pence. Let's see here. Why can we not find anywhere the exact location of where Mike Pence, actually, before we start on that, so Mike Pence is, when he walks into the Capitol, and I'm asking from the law enforcement perspective here, Chief Sund, Mike Pence, when he's not inside of the Capitol, he is the vice president. When he steps foot into the Senate, he becomes the president of the Senate. Okay? But is it true that he still has his security detail from the Secret Service as though he is the vice president when he is inside of the U.S. Senate? And then in addition to that, he is also granted a security detail, if you will, from the Senate Sergeant at Arms and probably the U.S. Capitol Police. Please explain us that transfer of authority, if there is any, and then in the event of a conflict, who is the senior decision maker for the protection of the vice president that becomes the president of the Senate in the Senate chambers? Okay? Is it the Secret Service agents that are with him? Is it the Senate Sergeant at Arms? So ultimately, the fate of the security of the president of the Senate rests with the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, technically, since he directs the Senate Sergeant at Arms, or the Senate Sergeant at Arms works for the Senate Majority Leader. Or is it the Capitol Police Chief, since you have the jurisdiction over the Capitol complex as the senior law enforcement official, but technically you have to report to the Senate Sergeant at Arms, the House Sergeant at Arms, and then the architect of the Capitol. Can you elaborate how the Capitol Police Board, you as the Capitol Police Chief, the Senate Sergeant at Arms, Michael Stenger at the time, and the Secret Service detail interacted to provide security for Mike Pence? And the next question follow-up is, after you answer that, is where were you located on January 6th when Mike Pence tweeted out at 1:02 p.m. that he basically said that he would not unilaterally be able to do anything as it applies to the electoral votes that were being counted that day during the joint session, but instead, in that tweet, the memo with the tweet, or tweet with the memo, I should say, less 2 minutes later, unilaterally blocked over 90% of Congress from participating in the joint session. So, in one regard, talk us through the chain of command, if you will, when the vice president is the president of the Senate and the Senate chambers. And then now let's move on to the role that let's just call him Mike Pence, when he becomes the presiding officer during the joint session. So when he goes into the House chambers, he ceases to be the vice president. He no longer is the president of the Senate. He is now the presiding officer. That's three different constitutional duties, roles, and responsibilities. So in essence, as the presiding officer of a joint session, he's no longer the vice president. So what role does the Secret Service have in that context? And then what role does the Senate Sergeant at Arms have as it relates to Mr. Pence now that he's presiding officer? Okay. Well, what role does the House Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, play at this point? Because Mike Pence is in the House chambers at this time. Okay. And the Speaker of the House, so the Speaker of the House is the boss of the House of Sergeant at Arms. Okay. The House Sergeant at Arms is one of the three members of the Capitol Police Board. By the way, the architect is somewhere teleworking, right? He's not there. You know that. You as a Capitol Police Chief work for the Capitol Police Board, but you're in the House chambers. Explain to us the dynamics, the chain of command, and the relationships between, in detail as much as you can, Mike Pence as presiding officer, his Secret Service detail, Nancy Pelosi, her Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, and then you as the Capitol Police Chief. Explain to us everybody's roles, responsibilities, missions as it applies to when Mike Pence is the presiding officer. And in that context, where were you? And why was it that Mike Pence, when Congressman Morgan Griffin, well, I should say, this is in the context of Morgan Griffin asking you the question, by the way. So, Chief Son, now that you explained that chain of command and all that other stuff, Congressman Morgan Griffith, I stood up when Nancy Pelosi said that at the advice of the attending physician and the sergeants at arms, Irving and Stenger, only 11 Democrat House members, 11 Republican House members, 11 Republican senators, 11 Democrat senators were allowed to be on the floor of the House. And I stood up and said, Mr. Vice President, meaning Pence, how is it that we're supposed to make a point of order or a parliamentary inquiry if we're not even allowed on the House floor to participate in the joint session? And Mike Pence basically barred us from participating in the joint session, calling it an objection. Since January 6th and on that day, Chief Sund, did you think to contact or let the parliamentarians, both of them, the Secret Service agents, the General Counsel of the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, all of them know that, hey, guys, tell Mike Pence you can't do that, because then we're not going to have a quorum for this joint session, because for the House, it requires 2/3 of the states, meaning at a minimum 34 members, one each from a different state. And on the Senate side, there has to be 67 senators to participate in this joint session. Did anybody raise that issue? Now, don't get me wrong. If you didn't know that was the quorum requirement, then there's no expectation, right? But at some level, everybody, the institution and the collective, needs to let the presiding officer know that this would mean that there would be no quorum. Congressman Morgan Griffith everyone was caught off guard by Pelosi and her telling everybody that you're not going to participate in the joint session, meaning 90%, over 90% of Congress. So that joint session was illegitimate. Now, hypothetically, had we requested you as the Capitol Police Chief and the Capitol Police to help members of Congress enforce quorum for the joint session, would you have been participating? I know it's a hypothetical. Let me put it this way. In the future, should Congress conduct a reenactment of the joint session on that was done on January 6th, but this time do it lawfully, legitimately, and with a quorum, do you think that the Capitol Police should enforce a quorum so that the presiding officer actually allows for a quorum rather than what occurred on January 6th? So I'll let you think through that. Answer it. If you can't answer it right now, please respond in writing later. I want you to think through that. And then can you talk the second component about Mike Pence that I wanted to ask you about, Mr. Chief Son, is none other than, well, how was it lawful, in your opinion? Well, first off, if you can explain, where was he located? Because nowhere is it written anywhere in court filings, nothing. It's almost as though like we can't find out where Mike Pence was after he was whisked away, right? It'd be nice to know. But that's a smaller question. If you could answer that, it should be quick. The next question is about Mike Pence. What's going on here? Did he invoke the 25th Amendment? I don't know if you're aware of that. But how was he ordering around the National Guard? Under what authority was Mike Pence ordering the D.C. National Guard? And was it in communication with General Milley? You might not know some of these things, but tell us everything you know as it relates to Mike Pence, since you were near him that day, ordering around the National Guard. What authority was he doing that under? And then at what point in time did Pelosi and McConnell request the executive branch's support to defend the Capitol on January 6th? And also tell us who were the ones that blocked you, and this may be Despacito. On 6 occasions, we've seen that you requested additional support to protect the Capitol on January 6th, but Pelosi said due to optics, no. Mayor Bowser said due to optics, no. I think we saw Ryan McCarthy, the Secretary of the Army, was saying due to optics, no. Paul Irving was telling you, the House Sergeant at Arms, that is, due to optics, no. And then please tell us, why do you think Yogananda Pittman never provided you 21 TD 159? And why didn't she provide it to Chad Thomas? And why did she basically fire Chad Thomas immediately after Chad Thomas said that he wasn't willing to testify to the effect that Yogananda Pittman provided Chad Thomas with 21 TD 159 before January 6th? There's a lot of questions we have, Chief Son, and you might be the only person on the planet that knows the response to that. And then in your professional opinion, since the Raiklin report is about to complete, the last question is, Chief Son, do you think with all the evidence and everything, is it possible that Nancy Pelosi directed Yogananda Pittman to conduct a Fedsurrection coup to facilitate the unlawful entry into the Capitol of demonstrators so that there would not be an ejection period legitimately to go ahead and expose the illegally conducted election, the illegal certification, the illegal acceptance by Mike Pence, and thus the subsequent no quorum certification of the 2020 election? And then the general counsel, Tad Tobias, along with Thomas Manger, were the key figures in covering it up. You don't have to answer that now, but you can answer it with your body language. Now, with that, those would be some of the initial questions that I was asked at 3 p.m. on Tuesday as the House Admin Committee Subcommittee on Oversight questions former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund. With that, Raiklin report complete. Okay, I'm going to continue because I'm on a roll. My show that I usually do, it's a 30-minute show on WVW TV. This is going to be, we're going to go after hours here. What are some other questions that need to be asked of Chief Son? Well, let me talk them through here. Chief Son, as you explained to us, so an officer on January 6th writes up the criminal referral. It goes up the chain of command. It hits the Capitol Police Chief and the General Counsel, and then they make a determination. Is it possible that Pelosi and Schumer could influence the Capitol Police Board to influence the Capitol Police Chief and the General Counsel to go ahead and conjure up seditious conspiracy and create facts surrounding and supporting that by doctoring, curating, and manipulating CCTV footage to support that narrative? And then is it possible, like I mentioned before, that not only is it possible that the CCTV footage was certain aspects were cut out that would disprove some of these criminal charges against the J6 defendants, and they weren't provided to the, let's just call it omission. Is it possible that they omitted some video that would incriminate Metropolitan Police officers, U.S. Capitol Police officers for example, excessive use of force, or maybe other transgressions committed, or exposure of Yogananda Pittman's role as interagency coordination for the U.S. Capitol Police? Is it possible that she coordinated with DHS, CBP, HSI agents that were there instigating on the Capitol grounds? Is it possible that she was, in her role as head of interagency coordination, also coordinating with the FBI, CHSs, UCs, affiliates, in order to help instigate folks and incite into the Capitol? What about DC Metropolitan Police? Would it have been Yogananda Pittman in her role as interagency coordination division chief, if you will, to go ahead and facilitate those interactions if she was directed to conduct a covert action on behalf of Nancy Pelosi? Just asking questions here. Let's see. What am I missing here? Is it possible? Actually, Chief Son, can you explain to us the two different extended jurisdiction zones of U.S. Capitol Police, the one with DC Metro and the one with Department of Interior Park Police? And specifically as it applies to, is the DNC and the RNC located in the jurisdiction zone? Can you talk us through everything you know about, for example, who should be the one charged with investigating the inert pipe bomb that was placed on January 5th in the evening down at the DNC and the RNC? Who would you suspect that we question? Maybe the head of security at the DNC? Maybe the head of the RNC security? Maybe the individuals that identified the pipe bombs, and then the sequence of events and the chain of custody and all the paperwork trail that started off with the individual that identified it. The video footage of DNC and RNC security. The Nest cameras of everybody in the vicinity that have houses there. Wouldn't it be nice for the Capitol Police to investigate that, Mr. Son, considering it's in your jurisdiction? Well, not now, but it would have been in your jurisdiction. Would you have investigated that had you remained as chief of Capitol Police? Oh, you would have. Interesting. Talk us through how that investigation would have been done. Would it have been something along the lines of interview the RNC head of security and everybody there that day, DNC and everybody there that day, every adjacent camera, coordinate with the DC Metro Police since the streets have cameras on them and they're owned by the DC Metropolitan Police Department. Would you have also coordinated with Chief Conti at the time, the chief of police at MPD, to identify who the suspect is? And then what about finding out what communications that suspect has? Is it possible that Yogananda Pittman coordinated that op? If so, what would have had to have taken place? How would she have done it? And on January 6th, the next question, what if, actually, not a what if, which unit was deployed in order to respond to the pipe bombs? And what impact did it have on the security posture on January 6th as it applies to protecting the outer perimeter of the Capitol? And did it make it easier for Ray Epps to conduct the first outer breach? Did it have an impact on Ray Epps's second and third outer breaches? And what would you have investigated as it relates to the undercovers and their role in facilitating and instigating the breach of the Capitol? So those would be some questions that I would ask. And let's see here. I have some people chatting in here. And I want to see if there's a question by someone. Even if the... I'm looking to see if... election justice rally was started. Let's see. Oh, the riot was started by paid actors, so no, they could. Let's see. There's some chat going on. All right, there's people interacting with each other. I was thinking that maybe we had a question. So those would be the primary questions that I would ask. And then I would also, as part of the Q&A, it needs to be understood, what can you tell us about Tad? Chief Son, you were the one that appointed him, correct? And Tad Tobias is the most senior person within Capitol Police or the Capitol Police Board that was in his position, or her, before January 6th, on January 6th, after January 6th, and remains in that position to this day. Can you give us some insight on why would Tad Tobias advise a Capitol Police Chief, in this instance Thomas Manger, to go ahead and create an agreement with an outgoing Capitol Police former acting Capitol Police Chief, and then at the time the head of Intel and Interagency Coordination Division, to go ahead and agree to put her on leave without pay immediately after the midterm elections when the Republicans took over, and then agree to her working in Zoe Lofgren and Nancy Pelosi's backyard as head of security at Berkeley, with no expectation that she would come back to work for the Capitol Police, but put her on leave without pay until she reached her retirement age. Let me say it a different way. Why do you think Thomas Manger, under what law does any policy, I know I'm skipping here, is there any policy whatsoever that would allow you as the Capitol Police Chief to sign an agreement which violates all policies according to what we've seen, to put somebody on leave without pay status, knowing that and having no expectation of their return, solely to make sure that she is still on the books, technically, to achieve her retirement age, while she's in hiding from being scrutinized for her role in the J6 Fedsurrection. Probably the most instrumental role. What are your thoughts, Chief Son? And while you're answering, what role did the general counsel have in drafting that? Or what would you expect role he had in drafting that in order to do so? I don't know about you, Chief Son, but that smells. I wouldn't use the word smell. There's this pungence, toxic pungence of this sure doesn't smell right. Something's up. It kind of smells like a cover up. Wait, another one? So, in order to protect the Fedsurrection warlord, your Yogananda Pittman, are you telling me that potentially Tad Tobias got her to retirement age because she's got dirt on Tobias to protect her? What is Tobias hiding? Why can't the members of the House Admin Committee, Subcommittee on Oversight, Morgan Griffin, can you provide a full copy of that leave without pay agreement? I don't think they've gotten it yet. Where is it? Let's get it. All right. I think this might be the last question. So, NDAs. Are you aware of what the policy is for the Capitol Police Chief and the former acting Capitol Police, so current Manger, former acting Yogananda Pittman, with the work of Tad Tobias? Are you aware that there have been instances from inside they had to sign non-disclosure agreements as it applies to January 6th and everything they know? What do you think that's all about? In your tenure as the Capitol Police Chief, did you ever coerce someone into an NDA? Have you ever done any NDAs? If so, why? What's the process? Oh, wait, are you saying no? What would you suspect that there would be a reason for that? Is it possible we're hearing that certain members of the Capitol Police were coerced to sign NDAs by Yogananda Pittman, Tad Tobias, and Chief Manger? One of those that was forced into an NDA, supposedly, is whom? Chad Thomas. Is it true? Or maybe we should ask this of Yogananda Pittman. Or maybe Chad Thomas. Maybe we should call in Chad Thomas. Mr. Son, do you think we should call in Chad Thomas, former Assistant Capitol Police Chief for Operations, to bring him in to testify under oath? Do you think it would violate the NDA if we bring him in to testify? I don't think it would violate it. We don't think it would violate it. So maybe that would be the mechanism for this committee to then find out whether or not Yogananda Pittman, in fact, did provide 21 TD 159 to Chad Thomas, who would have then been in a position to provide that piece of intel to you, to then be able to go before the Capitol Police Board for the 7th time, but this time with a piece of intelligence to basically say, hey, this is why I need additional support. Now you can't hide behind optics, because if you hide behind optics, you are complicit in anything that happens on January 6th, and you will be held accountable for as such. And is that the reason why Yogananda Pittman did not provide Chad Thomas or you that intel report so that she could be elevated to Capitol Police Chief for her little mini coup, and then for Nancy Pelosi to go ahead and conduct an overall coup by facilitating the unlawful entry into the Capitol, entrapment, divert the country's attention from an illegally conducted, illegally certified election so that it wouldn't be seen before the whole world on C-SPAN uncensored. And instead, they had John Sullivan, Jade Sacker, and all the media, and then all the FBI, and then the J6 committee to cover up for them as they conducted the J6 Fedsurrection coup. What are your thoughts, Mr. Chief Sund? Any comment on that? Those would be the questions that I would ask, just to begin with. With that, I'm done. I'm going to send this out to, let's just say, everybody.